Good evening, I'm Katerina Georgieva. This is CBC Windsor News. Thanks for watching. Tonight, concerns that despite all the attention, there's still no plan to protect the Ambassador Bridge from another blockade. Plus, everyone in the province is being urged to wear a mask whenever indoors, advice the Premier isn't following while sitting at Queen's Park. A ship fire in Windsor highlights gaps in emergency services on our waters. And it's Trans Awareness Week. We speak with a local leader to hear how they're helping and what you can do to be an ally. We are months out from the week-long blockade at the Ambassador Bridge. That protest shut down North America's busiest international crossing, and it took hundreds of officers to clear. But all this time later, it's not entirely clear how police or different levels of government will prevent or police another possible blockade. Documents show Windsor's mayor requested a meeting with upper-level ministers, but never got a response. The CBC's Jason Vio brings us the story.
We now know a policing debrief took place between the OPP, Windsor Police, and the Canadian Border Services Agency in September. An OPP spokesperson tells CBC that's standard after any major incident. They look at challenges, what works, and areas that can be improved. The OPP wouldn't go into any specifics or say whether they formed a plan in the event of this happening again. A question Windsor West NDP MP Brian Massey hopes will be answered following the Public Order Emergency Commission.
It'll also provide at least a path forward where people can expect emergency service planning from the municipal level, border service agency operatives involved, all those different things, because we can plan properly. But right now, we just have organized chaos.
Windsor's Drew Dilkins also asked for a debrief after the blockade, telling top provincial and federal ministers in March about the need for broader collaboration and support from upper levels of government. He said the need to bolster safety and security for our borders appears obvious. Neither government responded, something that surfaced during Dilkins' testimony at the commission last week.
I'm a little concerned because I've asked for the same. What we do know is that we have a vulnerable port of entry being along the Huron Church Road corridor.
One of the people the mayor sent that letter to is Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino. His office said the two speak very regularly and they will have a one-on-one in the coming weeks. While in Windsor last week, Mendicino said the commission will hopefully expose lessons learned from the Ambassador Bridge blockade.
One of the important questions will be whether or not we need to update our existing legal authorities so that all branches of law enforcement can more quickly mobilize and coordinate their efforts to make sure that we can address this new type of threat.
Windsor is still waiting for an answer around blockade expenses. It's a $5.7 million bill for police overtime, accommodations for hundreds of officers from across Canada, and those concrete jersey barriers. Some emails made public during the commission show a Ministry of Transportation official saying he believed the province would cover the $1.3 million cost for the barriers. An offer Windsor CAO at the time says the province stepped back from 2 days later. The commission will wrap up later this month. A report is due February 6th, a day before the blockade's anniversary. Jason Vio, CBC News, Windsor.
That commission continues in Ottawa. The head of Canada's RCMP taking the stand today. As Marina von Stackelberg reports, new evidence shows key information on the police's plan to dismantle the Ottawa protest may not have been shared the night before the Emergencies Act was brought in.
The day before the Emergencies Act was invoked, downtown Ottawa was filled with protesters. And RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki met with federal cabinet ministers. It was her job to keep them up to date on what the various police forces were doing to deal with the convoy.
Cabinet is on the verge of invoking the Emergencies Act. You are their window on law enforcement. You told us this earlier.
On this evening, she had an update. The Ontario Provincial Police, Ottawa Police, and the RCMP had crafted a plan to take down protesters in Ottawa, and they could do it with existing laws. But during that meeting, documents show she was never called on to speak. A lawyer with the inquiry presented that scenario to Lucki during testimony today.
Your update to Cabinet as it is deciding whether to invoke the Emergencies Act is that the police now have a plan, they've pulled it together, and that you, as the Commissioner of the RCMP, consider that plan to be workable without the authorities of the Emergencies Act. And that doesn't get delivered. Your messages don't get delivered to Cabinet when they then deliberate on the invocation of the Act. Do you appreciate the significance of that scenario?
Yes and no, because We had spoken about the fact that we had an integrated planning cell, that we were bringing together a plan.
Lucky says she did not know that evening Cabinet was on the verge of invoking the Emergencies Act. She admitted she had not told them that the police plan was official.
I guess in hindsight, yeah, that might have been something significant. Honestly, there was so much information going back and forth.
In the days that followed, Lucky says the Emergencies Act was useful for police here in Ottawa, especially because it gave them the ability to compel tow companies to remove the big rig trucks that occupied these streets. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
A day after the province's top doctor recommended people start masking up again, the Premier was taking heat at Queen's Park today for not following Dr. Kieran Moore's advice. It comes as some children's hospitals are overwhelmed and are being forced to cancel surgeries due to full ICUs. Queen's Park reporter Lorenda Redekop has the latest.
Yesterday, the Chief Medical Officer of Health strongly advised all adults to wear masks indoors.
The interim NDP leader started off question period taking off his mask before speaking, while on the government side, most members did not wear masks. Today, the opposition parties all did.
Why is the Premier not taking leadership and wearing a mask to protect our children?
The Premier didn't answer. Instead, his government House leader responded.
This government has been taking leadership right from the beginning of the pandemic.
Later, Health Minister Sylvia Jones pinch hit for the Premier, one of the few government MPPs masked, other than when responding.
There is nothing that the Premier hasn't done to protect our children and our most vulnerable.
Later, speaking to reporters, she defended her colleagues.
Personal choice is important here, and we should not be passing judgment on people who wear a mask or not wear a mask.
And she said this.
I think you have to take into consideration the size of the building, the size of the room. You know, we all make individual choices. We all have different circumstances in terms of who we are looking after at home.
But yesterday, the chief medical officer never mentioned room size.
I'm strongly recommending that all Ontarians, not just those at high risk, wear a mask in indoor public settings.
And if we can't convince those elected officials to follow their own medical officer of health's advice, how can we expect everybody else in the province to follow suit?
It's as viruses are hitting young children especially hard, mainly RSV and influenza. Pediatric ICU beds are full. Children's surgeries are being cancelled. Opposition parties want the government to do more to keep the situation from getting worse.
Public health is not asking for mandatory masking in school yet. But I can guarantee you, the day that they do, we will be right there behind them.
The opposition parties also called for stronger public health messaging from the government on both masking and vaccinations. Lorenda Redekop, CBC News, Toronto.
A federal safety agency says a ship fire in Windsor highlights a gap in emergency services at Canada's ports and harbors. The Transportation Safety Board voiced its concerns in an investigation report it released today. It centers on a fire inside the engine room of a bulk carrier called the Tecumseh. The fire happened while the ship was on the Detroit River in 2019. No one was injured. A crew towed the vessel to the port of Windsor. People on board the Tecumseh failed to put the fire out, eventually calling in a team from Texas to do the job. The Port Authority relies on Windsor Fire to deal with fires, but the chief says his department isn't trained to deal with marine fires. That's not required training, according to the Transportation Safety Board's report. The report also says that the Windsor Port Authority does not have a plan to deal with fires on ships. The harbor master disagrees, saying that there is a plan in place to evacuate ships. He added that they do training exercises with American and Canadian Coast Guards all the time. Both the fire department and the Port Authority have asked the federal government to fund shipboard firefighting. In international news, Ukrainian authorities say at least one person in the capital is dead after Russian missile strikes there. The mayor of Kyiv says at least 3 apartment blocks were hit today. There were missile strikes across Ukraine. Energy infrastructure appears to be Russia's biggest target. There are energy outages happening across the country, and officials say the situation is critical. There are media reports from Poland that 2 people were killed today after a projectile struck an area near the Polish border with Ukraine. Poland's top leaders were holding an emergency meeting due to the crisis situation, and the country was readying military units. The U.S. Pentagon and the Polish government say they cannot corroborate reports that at least one of those missiles crossed into Poland, which is a NATO member. Defense Minister Anita Anand was asked about the situation on the way into the House of Commons today.
I am aware of the reports. It would be imprudent for me to comment on them at this point. I am in close touch with our Polish allies, and we are monitoring the situation very closely.
It's Trans Awareness Week, a time to share stories about the experiences of trans people in Canada. For more, I spoke with the coordinator of Trans Wellness Ontario, a local group providing many services to Windsor's LGBTQ community.
I want people to understand that trans individuals are individuals. Everyone's lived experience is different. We shouldn't be lumping people together into one category because everyone's needs are different. Everyone's doing very different in their lives. There's some people who are struggling, and there's a lot of people who are thriving in this community.
Mm-hmm. And how does your organization work to support people who are struggling or those who are starting to question their gender identity?
We support people in a couple different ways. We offer free counseling, and that's for anyone over the age of 13. We also have peer mentorship with trans folks who have been through some different types of transition and can share their expertise with people just starting out. We have different programming. We have a youth drop-in every Saturday from 12 to 6. We have a parents group that's virtual and recently just started a parent support group the last Tuesday of every month for parents to come in and go on their own journey.
Mm-hmm. Can anybody just drop by the office?
Unfortunately, no. So we did. We were the victim of a hate crime in 2021. And because of that, and for some other reasons, we do keep our doors locked. We have a small staff, and we like to keep the people who are inside safe. We do have a doorbell, and we will answer the door when people come, but we aren't open to the public.
And how can allies support the community?
Well, there's a couple different ways. I'm going to say the first thing is through education, and you can do that on your own. There's lots of websites. One I'd like to mention is Rainbow Health Ontario. Do a Google search, check things out. Don't expect trans people who are strangers to answer those questions. It's a little off-putting when you just ask a stranger something. Also, people can reach out to Trans Wellness, ask me anything, email me, call me. We will definitely support. But today, one of the biggest ways that someone can be an ally is really by donation. We are a free service, and that's something that's not talked about a lot. A lot of people just assume we have a lot of government funding and we're okay. That's not the case in many nonprofits. We live grant to grant, just like people live paycheck to paycheck in this city. And so we do rely on the generous donations of the public, and that could be through giving money. Today we launched our Giving Tuesday campaign on social media, and that all the money donated goes directly to programming. And really when you hear transphobic slurs, when you hear people saying problematic things, stand up for people and just say, no, actually, that's not okay.
Why is it so important for the community to really pay attention to this week?
I think it's really important because, this is what we do every single day, so we know it's important. We hear clients say things like, I heard someone say this thing on the bus about trans folks, and I went home and I thought about taking my own life. We hear kids say, my mom just doesn't accept who I am. And those are stories that are really hard to hear. And I don't think that the general public knows that this is what's going on. Because if they did, I don't think that they would treat our community like this.
Sunday is also Trans Day of Remembrance and Resilience, and Trans Wellness Ontario will be holding an event to mark that this Sunday. We are looking at our city live right now. You can see some of the raindrops on our tower cam, and more rain expected tonight into tomorrow. And there's also a chance that it'll turn into flurries all week long. Colette Kennedy will take a closer look for us right after the break. It is time now for a look at our weather forecast, and for that, we have the wonderful Colette Kennedy joining us. Now, Colette, we took a peek at our live tower cam, and it's looking wet out there, which also just informs that this week is going to be a wet one.
Yes, it is going to be a wet one. And the thing is, it's just what form is that coming in? And in our case, it does tend to be more in southwestern Ontario, a rain event. There are, I mean, some exceptions and at times mixing with some wet snow. But in other parts of southern Ontario, it's more of a snowfall event. And here's one clue why, if you look at the temperatures. So Chatham, Kent, Windsor, all sitting above freezing, but not just a little above, a couple degrees above. So for now, that kind of holds things in the form of the rainfall. And then you see as we look around what some of the other readings are looking like, freezing or even in some cases like Kitchener a little bit below. And that's where we get into it being more of a snow event. And this is where the advisories are from Environment Canada then. They are further off towards the east. It's for the system as it comes in and continues to come in, but really into tonight and for tomorrow morning. But if you look at the radar in terms of what's happening, you can see the snow is kind of filling in, but it's filling in around to the north. Now, Sarnia being impacted, but at times really rained or just kind of a wet mess there. And along the northern shore, close to the lake shore of Lake Erie, it's more of a rainfall event too. And then you get over towards London and you're beginning to see where it is more of a snowfall situation. And in those areas where it's more of a snowfall situation, that's where the accumulations will be more significant. And I'll get to that in just a moment. But I do want to point out a few other things with this system. So first of all, we deal with this overnight tonight. The main snow carries on eastward and it becomes more intermittent into southwestern Ontario, mixing at times, but lighter. It still could be a little bit of scattered precip tomorrow, so maybe just a bit frustrating at times, but there's not much left here. So that's kind of taking us through Wednesday. Into Thursday, we could even be so lucky as to start out with some sunshine. But something that's of note that I want to point out that comes later on Thursday, it's this flow across Lake Erie. So this is more of a note for anyone planning to doing any travel. I know travel tends to be across, say, to Detroit, but just say you're going around to the Niagara region. As this sets up, we're talking about Buffalo, New York, potentially picking up 100 centimeters of snow or maybe 150 centimeters of snow because it is just going to be a chain of lake effect headed in that direction. So it's definitely of note. Snowfall potential, I said I'd come back to it. You see how it's negligible generally for us, and then you get into a widespread 5 to 10 centimeters elsewhere. Tomorrow, this temperature helps out with why they're going to be negligible in terms of snowfall accumulations for us in Windsor.
I just have to go back to 100 centimeters to 150 centimeters of snow. That's wild.
Yeah, and I know it's a few days away, but the model confidence is there of that happening. And, you know, they had an event like this in Buffalo almost to the date exactly 8 years ago.
Oh, my gosh.
I think the Bills are supposed to be at home playing this weekend. I don't know if that's going to be happening. We'll see.
Yeah, I don't think so. Well, thanks for that, Colette.
Yeah, you're welcome.
When we come back, we have an update from the United Nations about the planet's population. Stay with us. Canada's housing market continues to cool. The latest figures from the Canadian Real Estate Association show both sales and prices were down again in October. The average price of a home in Canada dipped to about $645,000 last month, a drop of nearly 10% compared to a year ago. It's a drop of more than 20% from the peak price back in February. Seeing a big drop in Windsor as well. The average price around $540,000 last month. The number of sales across Canada is off by more than a third from last October. Rising interest rates are cited as the cause of the slowdown. Our planet is hitting a major milestone today. The United Nations says there are 8 billion people living on Earth today, with much of the growth coming from developing nations in Africa. And that may highlight some concerns delegates are raising at COP27. David Common takes a closer look.
8 billion people now inhabit our ball in space, but the real story is the speed and consequence of population growth. 1 billion or so for many centuries. Then in 1927, not even 100 years ago, we hit 2 billion. By 2010, 7 billion. Now just 12 years to add our latest billion. The most growth now concentrated in the world's poorer nations. Elsewhere, birth rates are plummeting.
We are keeping girls in school longer. We are giving women opportunities to earn a living outside the home. We are getting rid of child marriage, and we are giving women, choices about their family size.
But we're living longer with better nutrition, clean drinking water, vaccines, and health care.
Thank you.
Lifespans are such a factor that 1 in 15 of us Homo sapiens who've ever lived is alive right now.
As the human footprint has grown, habitat for other species has shrunk. One effect is that 1 million animal and plant species are on the verge of extinction. As we get closer to animal habitat, more diseases are appearing. Things like COVID. Then there's climate change, worsened not solely by how many people there are, but how much those people consume from the earth.
I think what we really need to think about is what are those 8 billion people doing, and what can we do to make the world keep going with 8 billion.
50 years ago, most of us lived in rural areas. Now, well over half live in cities globally. Some expect we'll hit 9 billion within 15 years. Others believe fewer kids being born means the population size has nearly stabilized. David Common, CBC News, Toronto.
A lot of talk about the value of a dollar these days. Daily reminders that every penny counts, including the ones you find under the couch or on the ground. But a coin found on the beach last summer in Newfoundland might be worth more than face value. The gold coin has been identified as a Henry VI quarter noble with a face value of 1 shilling and 8 pence. This coin is probably the oldest coin ever found in Canada. It was likely minted in London between 1422 and 1427. That's about 70 years before John Cabot landed in Newfoundland after setting sail from England. Experts say the coin wasn't likely in circulation at the time it was lost. It could have been part of a collection owned by a settler who arrived after Cabot. And that old coin might have been hard to find on the beach, but something easier to spot: the millions of red crabs racing to the beach on Australia's Christmas Island. The annual migration from the rainforest to the coast is in full swing. The crustaceans cross streets, they climb bridges, they make their way through residential neighborhoods to get to the sea. Some roads are closed to allow safe passage, and they will eventually spawn off the coast of Western Australia. After mating, male crabs return to the jungle, and females remain behind to burrow and lay eggs for 2 weeks. Each can produce up to 100,000 eggs. Oh my God, what a sight that would be. That is it for CBC Windsor News. For news anytime, go to our website at cbc.ca/Windsor. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.